Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. The division by division NFL draft recap pods continue. Up next is the NFC West. If you have missed any of the previous 6 episodes, please get back and listen to them. They're all about 20 to 25 minutes. I share my thoughts on every single team's draft, favorite picks, value picks, questionable picks or moves, an overview of the draft. And then at the end of each episode, I rank my favorite drafts 1 through 4 for each division. 2 divisions left. This episode will cover the NFC West, and the last episode of this mini podcast series, 8 episodes, will be the AFC West. So let's jump right into it, starting with the Arizona Cardinals. They were moving around early in the draft on draft night. They originally were at pick 3. They traded back to pick 12 with Houston to allow Houston to come up for Will Anderson. They got an early second and a 1 and a 3 next year, an absolute haul, which is what they were looking for all of the draft season leading up to the NFL draft. They wanted to get out at 3. They're arguably the weakest roster in the NFL, and they got Houston to bite. Now, after they moved back to 12, they did jump back up to 6, costing them their early second, but they got back a late third. So they were moving and grooving early in that draft. Eventually, at pick 6, they select Ohio State offensive tackle Paris Johnson Jr. In the second round, at pick 41, they take LSU edge B.J. Ojulari. In the third round, at pick 72, they take Syracuse cornerback Garrett Williams. In the third round, at pick 94, they take Stanford wide receiver Michael Wilson. In the fourth round, at pick 122, they take UCLA offensive guard John Gaines. In the fifth round, they took at 139 Houston quarterback Clayton Tune. In the fifth round, they took Auburn linebacker Owen Pappoe. In the sixth round, at pick 180, they take Louisville cornerback Keitrell Clark. And in the sixth round, at pick 30, at 213 overall, they took West Virginia defensive tackle Dante Stills. All in all, the Cardinals had one of the best draft weekends of any team in the NFL when you take into account that they got Houston's first round pick next year. They could conceivably have the number 1 and number 2 pick next year. They could have 2 picks in the top 5, 2 picks in the top 10. They will have massive ammunition. If they do end up with the first or second pick in the NFL draft next year, they could conceivably choose to move on from Kyler Murray, probably get a haul of draft picks, including at least 1, if not 2 firsts for Kyler Murray, on top of then being able to draft Caleb Williams or Drake May. So the process that Arizona used here was unbelievable. So applauded to that. That is by far and away their best or favorite decision that they did, was the process of getting down, picking up that future 1, picking up a whole lot of 2024 draft picks. The Arizona Cardinals will own and really dictate how the 2024 NFL draft goes. But in terms of this year's draft class, who are my favorite picks? It was B.J. Ojulari in the second round. I've talked about it before. Once you got to the second round, it was kind of pick your flavor of ice cream in terms of the pass rushers, right? Some people, wanted Isaiah Foskey. Some people wanted Derek Hall. Some people wanted B.J. Ojulari. I really like B.J. Ojulari's game. I feel like he was being criticized a little bit as the pre-draft months kind of dwindled down, but I thought he was an early to mid-second round pick. He comes off the board right in that early portion of round 2. I really like B.J. Ojulari. I think the pass rush capabilities that he offers is highly intriguing. So I like that pick. I also love the Garrett Williams pick in the third round. For a team that is not looking to compete this year, I think the Garrett Williams pick is one of high risk, high reward, but the reward is really, really high. And in the third round of pick 72, I do not think the risk is all that great. If Garrett Williams did not suffer the injury that he suffered this past year, we're talking about a guy who would have been in the mix to be where, not maybe where Witherspoon went off the board, but where, Emmanuel Forbes went off the board, and Christian Gonzalez and Deonte Banks. So we're talking about a guy who had top 20, top 25 type cornerback upside. They got him at pick 72. So I really like that investment there as well. While I think there's some development and refinement needed for Paris Johnson, I do think the ceiling for him is right up there as high as any offensive tackle in this draft class. I didn't love the move back up from 12 to 6. I thought it cost them an early second, that I would have rather had an early second round pick and took the best available tackle in the at pick 12. There were still players available there on the board. Obviously, Pittsburgh, moved up to get it, to get their tackle Broderick Jones. I think what would have made me like their draft even slightly more was if they didn't come up from 12 to 6 to get Paris Johnson. They stayed at 12. They took Broderick Jones, and then they had that really early second round pick from Houston as well. If you tell me I could have had Broderick Jones and the second pick of round 2, I would have rather had that than Paris Johnson, but they had identified Paris Johnson as the tackle that they most highly regarded. And when you think about it, he was going to be the pick at 3. It's still a brilliant move, because in the end, they end up from moving from 3 to 6 only, get the guy they were going to take at 3. And in addition, they got a late third round pick that was part of that Lions package when they swapped 6 and 12. So they got a late third round pick in the 80s this year. They got a first and a third next year. So to just move from 3 to 6, when you're talking about the net result of those trades, from 3 to 6, get the guy they still were going to take at 3. They picked up a pick in this past draft in the third round in the 80s. Then they picked up a 1 from a team that could be in the top 5 next year, and a 3 from that team next year. That is a tremendous overall net positive for the Arizona Cardinals. So even though I could say, they could have stayed at 12, got Broderick Jones, and kept that early second round pick instead of that pick in the 80s, all in all, a job well done. My favorite value picks, I could have went a couple directions here. I went Owen Pappoe and Keitrell Clark, 2 guys taken in round 5 and round 6. I think Owen Pappoe could be a elite special teamer, but high level athleticism that he could develop into a guy that maybe plays in sub packages. And we know how often teams play in sub packages. So I like Pappoe's athleticism as a round 5 pick. And then Keitrell Clark, I think, could develop into a starting nickel corner at the next level. So they got him in the 6th round. I really like both of those value picks. I like Jonathan Gaines in the 4th, but I kind of expected him to come off the board in the 4th. So I didn't think anybody where they got him was tremendous value, but I did think Pappoe and Clark could have went around earlier, and for each of them, and nobody would have been that surprised. The one thing that I might question a little bit, I already talked about the trade back up. Maybe I would have preferred Broderick Jones in that pick in the early 30s and Paris Johnson in the pick in the 80s. But the only player that I maybe questioned a little bit was I wasn't as high on Michael Wilson as some. I thought, based on the injury history, I thought he was more of a mid to late round 4 guy. They took him late round 3. I think by that point, this draft was kind of pick your choice of guys. I don't think the guys coming off the board late round 3 were all that different than the people who came off the board in the middle of round 4 or even late round 4. So I think it's me, really nitpicking a little bit there, because I don't think there was any, there was a couple other wide receivers that I preferred over Michael Wilson, but I think he probably would have came off the board somewhere early round 4 if they didn't take him. So to take him at 94 wasn't that much of a reach. But all in all, Arizona Cardinals, A-plus draft, one of the best 5 draft classes, especially when you take into the additional 2024 draft capital they picked up. Fantastic job for a team that really needs to fully embrace the rebuild. I think they're well on their way of doing that. If we take this next to the Los Angeles Rams, talking about a team kind of embracing the rebuild, a team that we are used to not having many draft picks at all because they often trade them. They go out and I think they picked up 14 players in this draft class. In the second round, at pick 36 overall, they took TCU offensive guard Steve Avila. In the third round, at pick 77, they took Tennessee edge Byron Young. In the third round, at pick 89, they took Wake Forest defensive tackle Kobe Turner. In the fourth round, at pick 128, they took Georgia quarterback Stetson Bennett. In the fifth round, at pick 161, they took Appalachian State edge Nick Hampton. In the fifth round, at pick 174, they took Georgia offensive tackle Warren McClendon. In the fifth round, they also took Clemson tight end Davis Allen. In the fifth round, they also took BYU wide receiver Puka Nacua. In the sixth round, they took TCU cornerback Travius Hodges Tomlinson, also just going by Trey Tomlinson right now. In the sixth round, at pick 189, they took Nebraska edge O'Shane Mathis. In the sixth round, they also took Mississippi running back Zach Evans. And then they had a trio of picks in the seventh round. They took Wingate punter Ethan Evans, Oklahoma State safety Jason Taylor II, and Toledo defensive lineman Deshaun Johnson. My favorite picks were Steve Avila in the early second round. If he would have went late round 1, I wouldn't have been all that surprised. He's a guy who's a plug and play, could be a guy who's a starter on that offensive line for 7-8 years. I think you know what you're getting. He's got some versatility to play center or guard. I think he's a long-term fixture on that Rams offensive line. I really like the Byron Young pick in the third round as well. I know he's a little bit of an older prospect, but after you got out of that round 2, the edge rushers in this draft class really fell off. I thought Byron Young was the last one that had legit juice, legit bend off the edge as a guy who could make an impact at the next level. So I understand he's a little bit of an older prospect, but I like what he brings to the table there. So those are my 2 favorite picks. In terms of value picks, I think they found a lot of good value. Trey Tomlinson in the 6th round, to me, is tremendous value. I know he's undersized. I know he's an outlier in that regards. But to me, he could have came off the board 4th round based on the skill set that he offers as a guy who can compete for a nickel cornerback job. I just really like the technique, the instinct, the ball skills that he plays with, even at his size and concerns there. I would have thought he would have went 2 rounds earlier than where he did. Zach Evans, if he would have went in the early 4th round, where some of the other running backs came off the board, where guys like Roshan Johnson came off the board and other players like that, or in the 5th round where Eric Gray came off the board, and players like that, I would have thought that was more than reasonable. I thought he was a top 6 or so back in this draft class. So I really like Zach Evans, the pick there. And let's be honest, there was a lot of time last year that most people thought Cam Akers was on the outs in the Rams and didn't even think he was going to be a part of their future. So I think there's an opening there for Zach Evans to potentially materialize as a 6th round pick. I thought Puka Nacua is a guy who a lot of people like. I thought the 5th round was about the right spot for him. So I thought that was a good pick for them. The Clemson tight end, Davis Allen, if he would have went off the board, where Cameron Latou went off the board late round 3 or early round 4, I don't think anybody would have been that surprised. He's one of the more complete tight ends in terms of a good blocker and a pass catcher. Clemson coaches rave about this kid, so I like that pick as well. So a whole bunch of picks there that I thought were really good values where they got them in the 6th round and the 5th round. Really strong job there. My most questionable decision is I'm just not a Stetson Bennett fan. I know what he did in Georgia was impressive. I would have rather used an early 4th round pick on a different positional player. If they wanted to go get a quarterback, I would have rather than been more aggressive on day 2, and maybe they go get Hendon Hooker or somebody like that. Listen, we talked about that run on other episodes of recapping the draft. The 4th round and the 5th round are going to become sweet spots for teams taking developmental quarterbacks that they hope can develop into backups and save teams a lot of money. So I get where they're coming from. I like a guy like Jaron Hall a lot better than Stetson Bennett. There's some character concerns, there's some other issues. And I think his skill set was really inflated by playing on that elite Georgia team that I don't think at the next level, that ability that he showed at Georgia is really going to translate. But, the Rams think he can. Great play caller, great coach there, and Shane McAvee, great scheme. So maybe he can develop there into a backup. If we keep this going, the San Francisco 49ers were next. They did not pick due to the Christian McCaffrey trade, the Trey Lance trade, a lot going on that limited their draft capital this year. They did have some compensatory picks along the way. In the 3rd round of pick 87, they took Penn State safety Jair Brown. In the 3rd round of pick 99, they took Michigan kicker Jake Moody. In the 3rd round at 101, they took Alabama tight end Cameron Latou. In the 5th round, they took South Alabama cornerback Darrell Luther Jr. In the 5th round, they took Georgia edge Robert Beal Jr. In the 6th round, they took TCU linebacker D. Winters. In the 7th round, they had a trio of picks. They took Braden Willis, the tight end fullback out of Oklahoma, wide receiver Ronnie Bell out of Michigan, and linebacker Jalen Graham out of Purdue. It's a weird. Usually San Francisco and Baltimore, 2 of my favorite draft classes, year after year, rinse and repeat every single year. But this year I did not feel that way. My favorite pick was actually their 5th rounder, Georgia edge Robert Beal Jr. I feel like if he was not a part of that loaded Georgia defense, he would be getting a lot more recognition. But I think he's got a skill set that can develop into a situational pass rushing edge, and we'll see if there's more. But I do like Robert Beal Jr.'s game. I like his traits a lot more than maybe production. Wasn't asked to have a big role there. But believe it or not, that would be my favorite picks from their haul here. Value picks, I would say maybe Jair Brown. There was talk for a while that maybe he would be a round 2 guy. The pre-draft process was not kind to him. He tested out a lot slower than people expected, especially for a safety player. So that made him fall a little bit, but I still thought maybe he'd come off the board early round 3. They get him a little bit more towards the back end of round 3. So I thought that was a little bit of a value pick. Questionable picks. I mean, like I said, I didn't really love their process. I I can't get behind a kicker in the third round, no matter what, no matter how good Michigan kicker Jake Moody is. I just think for a team that didn't have a first or a second round pick, I know they're a really talented team, but I have a hard time investing in a pick 99. There were good players still available in the third round. There were good players who went off the board early round 4. Like, think about a guy like Kaylee Ringo. A guy like that. You make him the pick at 99 there over Jake Moody, and their draft class feels a lot different. A upside swing on an elite athlete from a major program who at once upon a time was getting top 20 buzz in this draft class. You put a guy like Kaylee Ringo in there, or other guys who went off the board round 4 who were falling. You put them there instead of Jake Moody, and their draft class has a very different feel to it. I just can't get behind drafting, specialists, kickers, punters, before like round 5, to be honest with you. And they invested a top 100 pick. And then also Cameron Latou, who I like as a tight end, but at 101, that just seemed really early. Again, I go back to the guys like Ringo and other players who I just thought were more talented, more skilled. There were wide receivers left on the board that I liked. There were players on the board that I thought were better swings for them than Michigan kicker Jake Moody and Alabama tight end Cameron Latou. So I question those 2 third-round picks after Jair Brown significantly. If we keep this moving, next up is the Seattle Seahawks, one of the best drafts in the NFL. Also, they're right in the mix as one of the top 5 or so, 6 in the draft. At pick number 5 in round 1, they took Illinois cornerback Devin Witherspoon. At pick 20 in the first round, they took Ohio State wide receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba. In the second round, at pick 37, they took Auburn edge Derek Hall. Also in the second, at pick 52, they took UCLA running back Zach Charbonnet. In the fourth round, at pick 108, they took LSU offensive guard Anthony Bradford. In the fourth round, at pick 123, they took Mississippi State defensive tackle Cameron Young. In the fifth round, at pick 151, they took Michigan edge Mike Morris. In the fifth round, at pick 154, they took Michigan center Olu Olutimi. In the sixth round, at pick 198, they took New Mexico safety Jarek Reed II. And in the seventh round, at pick 237, they took Georgia running back Kenny McIntosh. All in all, the Seahawks hit an absolute grand slam in this draft class. My favorite picks, hands down, Devin Witherspoon at pick 5, Charbonnet at pick 20, and then Derek Hall at the top of the second at pick 37 there. Love all 3 of those picks. I think while I would have been totally on board with them taking Jalen Carter at pick 5, I just don't know if it was a gamble they needed to make with how much Devin Witherspoon gives them in terms of him and Terry Woolen could theoretically develop into be maybe the best 1-2 cornerback duo in the National Football League. He's a completely clean prospect, character, work ethic, all that stuff off the charts. So Seattle decided to go with a guy who's got a high reward, but almost zero concerns in terms of character off the field stuff. They chose to do that and leave a guy like Jalen Carter, who might have the most talent of any player in this draft, but there are legitimate concerns. They went with the safer route, maybe the slightly less talented player, but a guy who gives them a really prolific potential 1-2 duo at the cornerback position. I mean, Jackson Smith-Njigba, is there a better place? This is a guy who dominated in college when he was literally surrounded by Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. He now goes to Seattle, and he's going to be surrounded by DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I mean, Geno Smith must be ready to go, raring to go. Easily makes that the best 1-2-3 wide receiver duo in the National Football League. And then Derek Hall. He's a guy that, he's got good athleticism, good explosiveness, very much like a Carl Lawson type player, good hand usage, tough play, good play strength, physicality, toughness. I really like Derek Hall pick there. So, maybe they wanted defensive line help or edge help at that pick 5 overall. Well, they get a guy at pick 37, and Derek Hall, who can give them that and then still get that cornerback, an elite player there at the top of the draft. So I love all 3 of those picks. In terms of value picks, I'll say JSN is a tremendous value too. I know I don't like double dipping here, but I mean, Jackson Smith-Njigba had absolutely no reason for going pick 20. And my guess is if he plays this year and he puts up another prolific 13, 14, 1,500 year with CJ Stroud as his quarterback, there is no way he's sliding to pick 20. I have said it for months and months. He dominated in one college football the same way Cooper Kupp is dominated in one at the National Football League. I think it could translate. We'll see if it does. But I think his quickness, his change of direction, I think that stuff is special. And I think he's going to be hard to cover. And teams are not going to be able to pay much attention to him, especially early on in his career when you're talking about DK Metcalf on the outside, Tyler Lockett on the outside. So just an unbelievable, trio of picks there to start. Kenny McIntosh, I thought was a tremendous value pick in the 7th round. I know the pre-draft process was not kind to him either, but I think he's one of the best pass-catching running backs. If you're going to make a list of straight pass-catching running backs, he would easily be somewhere in that 3 to 4 range for this draft class after the guys towards the top of the draft. So we're talking about a guy, and Pete Carroll doesn't mind having different roles for different running backs, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I think Kenny McIntosh is a guy who can make the roster. You've seen Seattle have these guys, whether it's been Travis Homer or DJ Dallas, and they had specialized roles for them. Even when they had, better, more talented early down runners, they still used that third guy. I think Kenny McIntosh can develop into that as a situational pass-catching running back that they find ways to utilize that skill set. I knew he wasn't going to come off the board probably round 4 anymore, but I still thought round 5, round 6 for him. For him to go all the way at 237, I thought was tremendous value. I like the Olutimi pick. I think he's one of the better run blockers from the center position, so I think he can potentially start down the line. I think Cameron Young, they needed a run-stuffing defensive tackle. He offers that. Anthony Bradford, I think, could develop into a starting guard on the interior of that offensive line there, and he's a great run blocker himself. Seattle, we know, loves to run the ball. So up and down here, Mike Morris in the 5th round I thought was good value. The only thing I would question about the Seahawks' entire draft, to be honest with you, is I thought the Zach Charbonnet pick at 52 was something they just didn't need to do. To me, it was the Seahawks just not being able to control themselves. I think Kenneth Walker is a special talent, and I don't want to limit how much I give him the ball. I understand we're in the day and age where there is no bell counts, but I still want to make sure Kenneth Walker is touching the ball 18 times a game, 17, 18 touches a game. If Zach Charbonnet is going to make him more of a 13 or 14 touch player, and it's going to be Charbonnet for another 12 or 13, and it's going to be a 50-50 or 60-40 timeshare, I think they're hurting what they're going to get out of Kenneth Walker. Teams don't look at running backs as long-term investments anymore. They look at them as one contract players, and then we'll see. So if I'm going to think of a running back as a one contract type player, I want to be maximizing everything I can get out of him. I don't need to be, protecting him, in his first contract, if we're uncertain whether we're even going to consider offering him a second contract. So I don't want to be giving Kenneth Walker 13 or 14 touches. I want him in the 17, 18 area. And I feel like the pick of Charbonnet at pick 52, who had a lot of backers, I wasn't as high on him as others, but other people were. So he's going to get looks. He's going to get touches. I do think Kenneth Walker will outshine. I think once they're both in that room, I think we're going to see that there's a pretty big talent gap and talent disparity between these two. I think the thought that Zach Charbonnet is a pass catching back is borderline laughable, and I don't really say things like that too often, but I don't care what his stats say. He played in an offense that produced gaping holes for running backs, allowed him to build up his speed and then use his play strength. I think he's a very scheme dependent player who needs to have a great rushing O-line in front of him to allow him those gaping holes to pick up his steam. I think you see his better footwork once he gets to the second level of defense, but that's when he has gaping holes. I think his stop-start ability is very questionable. I think he's going to struggle with that at the next level, and I don't think he's going to be a pass-catching running back at the next level. I'd be stunned if teams look at him like that. I don't even think Seattle's going to look at him like that. I think they're going to look at him as more of an early down guy, and that's why I said I wouldn't be surprised if Kenny McIntosh is very much in the mix to be their pass-catching back, because I just don't think – I know what Charbonnet did in college, but I think it's a little fool's gold to think he's going to be a pass-catching running back. He does not fit the profile of what NFL teams are usually looking for pass-catching running backs. They're looking for guys who are space players, guys, who can run different routes, who, if they want to line him up in the slot, can do different things with them. He doesn't have the speed or the quickness and the change of direction to beat linebackers, in the open field. He just doesn't have that. He needs that runway. I think he could be a good guy who catches screens, and if he's got good blocking in front of him, can make things happen. But I do not think he fits the profile of a guy who's going to be a good receiving back. I think average or functional at best. I think Kenneth Walker could be average or functional at best. He showed it last year after not being asked to do anything in college. Last year, he caught almost like 27 or 30 passes. So I think he already showed he could be functional. I think that's all Charbonnet will be at the next level too in terms of his pass catching ability. If we keep this moving, I think I covered it. So the NFC West, 4 teams. I did like overall all of the drafts here. I will say without a doubt, Seattle was my favorite team. They're number 1 in the division. just the picks they got, Witherspoon, Smith-Njigba, Hall, everything about them. I love their draft. So they would be number one in terms of my favorite drafts from the NFC West. The Arizona Cardinals would clearly be number two for me, especially with the future draft capital, the process that they brought. I had almost no complaints with what they did. The only issue I said I had was them moving back up to get Paris Johnson. I think I would have just preferred staying there, taking Broderick Jones and having that early second-round pick instead of a pick in the 80s. But that's nitpicking. They're set up big time for the 2024 NFL draft. I would say the Rams were probably my third then in the division. Just a lot of solid picks. I think they're looking to get 4 or 5 guys who can be legitimate starters or contributors from this draft class. I think they will get that when you go up and down this massive list of draft picks. And then last, rounding out the division, I talked about them. I was not a big fan of what San Francisco did. I thought their 2 third-round picks were very, very questionable at best. And when you don't have a first or a second-round pick, I do not think you want to be reaching for third-round picks. And I know they were late thirds, but I thought there were talented players on the board who offered a lot more upside and would have made their draft class look a lot better. So San Francisco clearly fourth for me. So Seattle 1, Arizona 2, Los Angeles 3, and San Francisco 4 in terms of favorite draft classes from the NFC West. If you're enjoying these, please get over to the website. SS Football is the fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out our premium content tab. It is still not too late to purchase the premium notebooks. There's a lot of value that can be had in that, from the scouting notebook, which has detailed scouting reports on 100 of the offensive skill players. The draft projections notebook, even though the draft is come and gone, there is a snapshot of over 400 players in terms of how they win, developmental areas. And then most importantly, right now, you get the rankings notebook, which has all our different rankings. It has rookie rankings for your dynasty drafts. It has IDP rookie rankings. It has Devy rankings. It'll soon have updated positional dynasty overall rankings as well. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.